This section is based on a few papers I wrote about 5 to 20 years ago. So some of the data, some of the facts have changed since then. Notably, the US has become a net exporter of energy rather than a net importer. Okay. Okay, so if you're looking at this energy market like oil, natural gas, etc., there is a very fundamental asymmetry which drives this market. And that asymmetry has that the producers are cartelized, whereas the consumers are fragmented. If producers are cartelized and consumers are fragmented, producers are going to, they'll act like monopolists and they shall squeeze the consumers and they shall get like a huge amount of surplus. Now, and in my calculations, which I did in these papers, I think a couple of these papers are actually there on the SSRN website. You can check it out. So what I found is that if the consumers were able to get together and negotiate rather than being fragmented, then over about 60 years, they could get about $50 trillion of that surplus, which is now currently going to the producers. And of course, it's hard to predict like what's going to happen over 60 years, but even like, let's say, at least 20 trillion, a lot of money. And in those calculations, what I also said, like I said, this is a bit dated, that because now the US has become a net exporter rather than importer of energy. But back then, when I wrote this paper, the US was going to get at the current level at that time, the US was going to do a wealth transfer of about 8.4 trillion, China 7.3 trillion, and India 4.5 trillion, and other large importers a lot of wealth. And like I said, even though this number for US is still not, it's not accurate anymore because of the change in the US's circumstances. It has now become an exporter rather than importer. But for the remaining countries, these numbers are largely true. You can see, for example, here, UK is missing because it has North Sea oil. Norway is missing. Okay, actually, Britain is there. I think maybe it's a net exporter, importer. I don't know. I have to check it out. Okay. So the currently fragmented consumers of the oil importing countries can benefit if the above countries band together, and let's call it an organization for rational energy policy. Now, in one of these papers, I also kind of pointed out that, if you have such an organization, it's an organization of consumers, and so the consumers have, let's say, formed a cartel to negotiate with the oil producers cartel. So instead of the consumers being fragmented, you could have the consumers get together and then negotiate the price instead of some price which they have to pay because the producers have restricted like production, for example, to raise prices, etc. Now, okay, so these were like the wealth transfer over the longer period of time. And this is just like every year how much these countries are losing by not cartelizing. You know, these countries should get together and form a cartel of buyers, and if they do that, according to my calculations, these would be the savings which they would make. You know, China, of course, being a big importer, would save the most. They're also very uh, their rapidly expanding economy needs a lot of energy. India would also save a lot, and Japan, South Korea, etc. Okay. In one of these papers, I also pointed out that there is this metric called the levelized cost of electricity, and this levelized cost of electricity essentially what it does is that it tries to measure how much energy costs for its consumers, and then you kind of do like a comparison for alternative power sources, like you do this thing for oil, natural gas, solar, nuclear, etc. However, this calculation is a partial equilibrium analysis. So it misses two important general equilibrium issues. Firstly, the impact of a reduction in oil demand on international oil prices. I mean, this was really this paper, which was a later paper, was really talking about replacing oil by solar and how much firms could benefit by doing that. So, by reducing the oil price, so you should not take the oil price as given, because if the countries band together and or if they replace oil by solar, then it'll have a impact on international oil prices. Secondly, the expenditure on energy domestically has a different economic impact to an expenditure of imports. So, if you're spending money domestically, it generates, jobs domestically. So it has all these positive effects. Whereas if you are purchasing energy from abroad, let's say in the form of crude oil, then you're not going to get that benefit. So that's again something that should be accounted for. So the levelized cost of electricity misses these two general equilibrium issues. Now, moving on, the most contentious political, scientific, economic question of the past decade are greenhouse gases driving climate change, which is harmful? And the answer is doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because what my paper finds is that for the oil importing countries, replacing imported oil by solar will save them a fantastic amount of money. It's also going to drive down, solar is increasingly cheaper. Secondly, the reduction in demand for oil will drive down the price of oil in the international market. And I do a few, like I try to make the estimates of demand curve and supply curves and try to find what the equilibrium price will be. But anyway, the point is that they're going to save so much money by switching to solar that whether that's going to benefit climate change or not becomes immaterial. You should do this anyway. Do it anyway.